Hello and welcome to Other Voices, brought to you by Peninsula Peace and Justice Center. I'm your host, Paul George. On this month's edition of Other Voices, we're going to be talking about what's probably been in every headline on every newspaper front page for about the past month or two. That's the revelations by Edward Snowden of the massive NSA spying scandal, spying on just about every American, it seems. Data mining, metadata, internet interceptions. It's quite an elaborate story, and that's what we're going to find out, what it means for our own rights, what Congress might have to say about it. And to help guide us through all this legal thicket, we have an excellent young lawyer with us tonight, Nadia Kayali. Nadia is the Executive Vice President of the National Lawyers Guild and also a legal fellow with the Bill of Rights Defense Committee. Nadia, welcome to Other Voices.
Thanks for having me on.
I want to go briefly over your bio. You, while you were in law school, you worked on the editor for the Hastings Race and Poverty Law Journal, Matthew O. Tobriner Summers Social Justice Fellow, Student National Vice President for National Lawyers Guild, ACLU of Northern California, San Francisco Bay Conservation and Development Commission. A long list. You're not after a corporate legal practice here, are you?
Certainly not. I'm sure they wouldn't have me at this point.
Well, we're glad to have you here tonight to help us understand what's going on. Tell us briefly about Bill of Rights Defense Committee and National Lawyers Guild too, if you want, because they're both. I haven't seen a lot from National Lawyers Guild on this, but Bill of Rights Defense Committee has been one of the leading organizations on Fourth Amendment and all kinds of rights. So the elevator speech on Bill of Rights Defense Committee. It's a slow elevator going to the top floor.
So the Bill of Rights Defense Committee is a national organization that works at the grassroots level. So we're really unique in that sense. You know, a lot of national organizations, they're on the Hill, they're lobbying senators, they're working on policy change at that level.
Yeah, their email list is national, and that's
absolutely.
about it.
And we do have a national email list, but we believe that we're really able to see change at the grassroots. It's a lot easier to talk to your elected representative on city council or at the county level, or even at the state level. It's a little difficult in a state like California, where we are so big, but still, it's a lot easier to affect change at that level. And the reality of national security and the national security state is that we're really seeing it played out at all levels of law enforcement and all levels of government. Mm-hmm. So when you're, we sort of envision it as a huge monster. And if you are cutting it off at the knees, that's what you're doing when you're working at the local level.
Right.
Is you're really affecting an appendage of the national security state. So we really encourage that sort of grassroots activism. It's been extremely exciting to see the Restore the Fourth work that's been happening around the country, people getting really excited and upset and taking that kind of action. So that's how we focus our work.
Yeah, and you're very active on campuses, I understand. Is that right? Do you focus on campus activism in particular, or did somebody steer me wrong on that one?
We do a little bit of work on campuses. We work with a broad range of partners, and one of the things to really emphasize about us is we are nonpartisan, and we are really looking for areas where these issues overlap, where people who might not agree on other things agree that surveillance is wrong, that the national security state is wrong, and that we want to protect our constitutional rights and our civil liberties.
Yeah, well, before we get into the details of what they are doing, let's talk about the reaction to it and some of this overlap. Some of the public opinion polling, for example, has shown finally a flip since September 11th of, is the government doing too much or not enough to keep us secure? And for the first time in all those years, the polls seem to have flipped and become they're doing too much. And that seems to be part of what Edward Snowden has wrought with his revelations. Is that what you're seeing? And
Yeah.
are there organizations from across the political spectrum reacting?
Absolutely. I was on a panel with Daniel Ellsberg actually right after the first set of leaks, the Verizon business.
Good timing.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had actually planned it before all of this came out. It was fantastic sitting next to him. And he said that he believes that the leaks that Snowden has exposed are actually the most important leaks there have ever been because of the extent of the spying that's going on. And I think people are finally beginning to realize that. You know, sometimes when you're doing this work, you feel like you're sort of just shouting in an empty room, and that has not been the case. People are outraged. People are finally paying attention, and that's something very exciting as an advocate to see.
Yeah, I'm also really encouraged by the polls apparently showing that the majority of people, or at least a plurality of people, think that Snowden is indeed a whistleblower and not a leaker or a traitor, which tells me, A, that people get what he's doing, and B, understand what a whistleblower is.
Yeah, I was actually at Netroots Nation, not far from here, in June, and when Nancy Pelosi said that you know, she felt the need to emphasize that Edward Snowden, what he did was break the law, and the entire crowd booed at her. It was fantastic. You know, Netroots Nation is the sort of environment that's really friendly to Democrats and would typically, I think, be more friendly to her. And a man actually had to be dragged out of the room by security. And she got heckled a lot over the NSA.
We also haven't been really well served in this whole issue with our Senator, Dianne Feinstein, who serves on the Intelligence Committee. We immediately circulated a petition and sent off hundreds of signatures to her and got back a letter very quickly from her, which is unusual to begin with. It usually takes months. Defending it. It was a 3-page letter, top to bottom, defending the program.
Yeah, she's been on the forefront of defending the program since the very first set of leaks. Before she even had viewed all the leaks, she had a press conference speaking about the program and saying, we've been fully briefed on this program and we know that it is best for our national security and it's necessary. And she continues to do that, regardless of all the public pressure, regardless of the conversation. I haven't heard her say one substantive word. You know, it's really unfortunate. And I think, especially considering that California in particular, there are people from across the political spectrum who are concerned about this, and she really doesn't seem to care.
Yeah. We're going to come back to the question of dealing with Congress when we talk about what to do about this. But let's get into it and try to help everybody understand what Edward Snowden told us is going on, and just as importantly, what we still don't know. So first of all, you know, it sounds like a lineup at some summer rock festival. You know, Prism, Stellar Wind, X Keys score. Try to break it off into bite-sized pieces for us. What have we learned that we didn't know before the Edward Snowden revelations about what the NSA is up to and other agencies?
Yeah, so I'll actually start chronologically with the first leak, which was the Verizon order, and that order was showing that all the metadata for every call in the United States is getting gathered by the NSA. And one of the analogies they've used a lot of times is that when you're looking for important information, it's like a needle, and instead of sifting through the haystack, we're just going to bring the whole haystack in, regardless of the fact, of course, that they're sweeping up innocent Americans' communications. And you know, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act and the purpose of the NSA, of course, is to be focused on non-U.S. persons, on people outside of the country. And because of the scope of the order, what was revealed is that there was really no filtering mechanism and that it is all of those business records that's being swept up.
And I think this is an important point. It's supposed to be focused on people outside of the country because the Fourth Amendment doesn't allow them to do this sort of thing with people inside the country.
And also because that was the purpose of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act when it was passed, you know, was to limit this sort of surveillance. And at the very least, there should be at least one, you know, the conversation before all of these leaks was about the fact that Americans who might be calling people overseas might be subject to surveillance. And now we're not even talking about people calling people overseas, and I don't know about all of you, but I do make regular overseas calls. Yeah. It's now completely domestic communications. And metadata really does reveal a lot about somebody. So that's the phone numbers that you call, how long the phone call was. You know, the phone numbers can reveal the location. They've said, the government has said that they are not collecting cell phone location information, but I have no idea why we would believe what they're saying at this point. Right. So, you know, the full extent of what they're getting could be even worse than we know.
So why are they collecting this? When I get my phone bill in at the end of the month, it has exactly that data. You know, the date and time, who I called, how long I talked, and then how much they're charging me for being over my minutes for the month. So, I mean, it's there. Can't they go back to the phone companies when if they find the need for someone living here and get it then? Why are they sweeping up all this data?
Well, I think that that's really the key question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Why can't they have actual particularized suspicion, because that's the legal baseline for the Fourth Amendment. That's supposed to be the legal baseline for any sort of intelligence gathering, right? Is having particularized suspicion that somebody is actually breaking the law. And then you go back and then you get the information. It's not like phone companies are burning all of their records at the end of the day. We know that all of this is stored indefinitely. So there's no reason why they couldn't go back and get that information later. And
Has
instead,
anybody asked them that question? And have you seen any kind of
I haven't seen a conversation about that. One of the things I do know is that there is a suspicion among a lot of people that getting the order from the FISA court was actually the phone company's way of covering themselves, knowing that they would have given up the information anyway.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So the phone company didn't really want to give this up, or?
No, we would like to believe, right,
Yeah.
that the corporations, and I know we're going to talk a little bit about some of the corporations around here later, but we would like to believe that the corporations that we share all of our private information with are not going to share that private information with somebody else. But unfortunately, I don't think that's the case, and I think it's been proven time and time again that that's not the case.
Yeah, I remember, I'm not going to remember his name, but there was a telecom company executive who really kind of fought this back in the early days of the Patriot Act and the first revelations.
Yeah, the national security, there was also the case with the national security letters, where there was a company that was trying to not carry out these national security letters. And but I think that's certainly the exception. The reason that we even remember those cases is because they are the exception.
Yeah. He's no longer a high-ranking executive either. Is part of why we don't remember these cases.
The names.
Yeah.
So that was just the phone records.
So yeah, that's the phone metadata. And then came the revelations about all of this data mining on the internet.
On the internet. So Prism and Keystone, these are both programs that were exposed by these slideshows or presentations that would have been given to people who are going to be learning about these programs, so people within the NSA, or more likely contractors, since we know how many contractors are working on intelligence in this country now. And so there's, of course, been statements from the administration that the slideshow on Prism is inaccurate. There have also, however, been statements that the slideshow on Keystone is accurate. And so both of these programs are sophisticated programs that allow really, really specific filtering of most of the information on the internet. And Prism, so Prism supposedly allowed direct access to servers of major companies. Keystone is a program that basically holds all of the information in the internet. And if you have somebody's email address, you can, this slideshow showed all of these fields that you could search, and you could type in somebody's email address, and the amount of information that you could get back is staggering. And we keep hearing the phrase metadata, and it's only metadata, right? Keystone, according to the presentation, would allow you to get the contents of emails, the contents of Facebook chats, really private information.
Yeah, way beyond the outside of the envelope. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's been pretty much confirmed. This is a lot of data. And is it Keystone or Keyscore? I had it.
Is it? Was I?
I think it's Keyscore, but yeah, they'll rename it next week and say they ended the program. This is
just like Stellar Wind, which was the other program you mentioned.
Yeah. Well, there's also Total Information Awareness that caused a big stir many years ago, and they said that went away. This sounds like the same program entirely. So what are they storing all this stuff forever?
So with
email contents and.
So it's unclear with Prism. It would be access to servers, and with actually one of the key selling points of Gmail is how much space you get. So if that cooperation is actually happening, if that sort of cooperation that was originally alleged when the Prism documents were leaked is actually happening, then the companies would be able to store it. For XKeyscore, they actually can't store all of that information forever because it is so much.
Yeah.
But they can filter and try to find what they want and set that aside for later.
So I'm just trying to put all these little pieces in categories where I can handle them. Prism is access to the servers that all our computers run through. So that information they're scooping up there is basically what websites you're visiting. It has nothing
Prism
to
is
do-
access to corporations' servers, and it's a partnership with corporations. And then XKeyscore, it's unclear how XKeyscore works. I mean, I could probably understand it better if I had a better technical background.
Yeah.
But again, just looking at the presentation, there are sort of gateways that are filtering the information in the internet and making it, basically storing it, for a limited amount of time where it can be searched and saved.
Okay. Well, let's. What don't we know? What do we think might be lurking out there that we don't know? Or what questions?
That's worse than what we already know.
I mean, I don't know how you go beyond their scooping up everything and keeping it at least for some length of time. But has anyone said, well, if they're doing this, they might be able to do that? Or is there a line of inquiry that way? Or
I think people have been so focused on what we do know, which is more than has ever been revealed before, that we haven't even had the chance to ask those questions. And I also think, we've talked a lot about the technical capabilities and how these programs actually work, technically speaking. There's a lot of questions about the law that is allowing these programs, and people are certainly asking questions about that.
Well, let's go there, because you're a lawyer. There's clear violations of the Fourth Amendment. I'm not a lawyer, but when I read the Fourth Amendment, it seems pretty clear to me that this program doesn't fit. We know the FISA court authorizes things in secret. But what about XKeyscore? That doesn't sound like anything that even comes under the FISA court.
Right. So that the conversation around XKeyscore has emphasized, the articles that I've read and the officials that have mentioned it have said that it doesn't have anything to do with the legal justification, that we're just talking about the technical capacity at this point. And it is different. What we know about it is certainly different from the Verizon having that order from the court and seeing the justification. We don't know what the justification for that is. And unfortunately, the whole idea of the court system in this country is one that is adversarial. There are people making their point to the court. There's one person on one side and one person on the other side, and instead we have a court that is basically rubber stamping these applications for surveillance authority, and at this point is not even just rubber stamping them, is actually creating new Fourth Amendment law. The Fourth Amendment is always changing, always shifting, and there is unfortunately one doctrine that from the Supreme Court that does affect all of this, which is the third-party doctrine. Are you familiar with that?
I am, but in case people aren't.
So this is a really good one to know if you use Facebook, which I'm guessing most people here do. So the third-party doctrine is the doctrine that once you turn over your information to a third party, you no longer have a reasonable expectation of privacy in that information. Now, that doctrine came from a time before we were putting so much of our personal information online. What is the difference between writing an email and sending it to somebody and knowing that that's going to be going through Google's servers, and writing a letter and putting it in the mailbox and sending it off?
Right.
The letter, you have a reasonable expectation of privacy. The email, you maybe do, you maybe don't. I mean, email is a whole other issue, and there's legal discussions around that right now in Congress. But the point being, the third-party doctrine is really outdated, and but it also does serve as a justification for a lot of this.
Yeah. Speaking of regular old-fashioned mail, the Supreme Court, in fact, has said it's okay for the FBI to collect the information that's on the outside of the envelope.
That's correct.
Isn't that the start of the kind of the concept of metadata? You put it out in public, and so it's okay.
Yeah, and it was actually just revealed that the post office takes pictures of the outside of every piece of mail that's sent.
Right.
They're doing it, for, I think they said, for customer service purposes. But we do know that information is being kept as well on a regular basis. Again, it's this whole idea of completely suspicionless. They're just taking all that information.
They do love their haystacks, don't they?
They sure do.
to collect them up. So this concept of the third-party doctrine, before we went on the air, I mentioned to you this new movie that's out called Terms and Conditions May Apply. And without trying to go through what this movie says, it'll be playing around. I encourage you folks to look for it. It talks about all this data that these companies collect. And one of the things that it leads to is that, if you search for a pair of sandals, every web page you start seeing is going to be advertising sandals to you. And, if you want to get a good pair of sandals, that may or may not be okay with you. But what the government has done is, instead of trying to get information on who's looking for sandals from individuals, they can now go to the companies, this third-party thing, and collect that information there. And they're looking for more than a nice pair of sandals. So
quinoa and pressure cookers.
Yeah. And backpacks, yeah. And backpacks. So we do have a good crowd here. I want to get to the audience questions because that's always a key part of this program. But we are in Silicon Valley. Probably most people here are using Facebook somehow, or Google, or any Yahoo, or anybody still using Yahoo?
I use it to look up movie times.
What do we know about the complicity of these large, popular tech companies, or maybe the question should be, what don't we know about their complicity or role in all of this?
So there's a lot more that we don't know than that we do know. Unfortunately, there are gag orders on the companies. They are not able to share what they want to share. Now, what we would actually know if those gag orders were lifted, I think, is unclear. I think these companies are certainly complicit, depending on the company and the corporate culture, to a greater or lesser extent, depending on the terms of service, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
But the PRISM program implicated these companies and specifically said that they were cooperating in the program.
In fact, as I recall, there was a chronology where it showed where
when they joined,
Yeah.
when they signed up. And Microsoft, of course, has been one of the biggest targets of criticism for this, and it's actually been, again, around these different programs, that they actually helped the NSA avoid loopholes that would make it more difficult to track down people, that people could have multiple Outlook aliases, that they could use encryption software. So, they're not just being forced, and that's why I mentioned earlier that the Verizon being required to turn over information through the basis of a court order. Sure, there's that court order and we've seen it, but we have no idea what they were giving away before that.
Right.
And I don't think that we should rely on any of these companies to simply not be evil. And I should say it's really ironic that right before all of this came out in April, Microsoft launched a new campaign saying your privacy is our priority. I don't know exactly what the tagline was, but it was almost exactly that.
Uh-huh.
We do, privacy is a selling point at this point.
Yeah.
And yet it's pretty clear that there is some cooperation without arm twisting.
Yeah.
And I think it will be fascinating if any of the gag orders are lifted to see what the companies have to say for themselves. I'm not going to believe most of it, but I'd love to know what their excuse is or what they say the
or what
extent
their
of their
PR spin
participation is.
Yeah, your privacy is our priority because we're going to hand it over to the NSA. Okay, I do want to get the audience questions. We're not going to have phone calls tonight if you're watching at home. The phones are not up and running, so I apologize for that. So next time, just come down here to the studio audience and be part of the studio audience. Let's talk briefly before turning this our attention to the audience. And this is where Bill of Rights Defense Committee and other really good groups come in. What do we do about all this? So first of all, Bill of Rights Defense Committee is part of a lawsuit around this.
We are. The EFF has filed a complaint.
Electronic Frontier
Foundation. The Electronic Frontier Foundation has filed a complaint in the Northern District right here. And the plaintiffs in this complaint, I think it's great to just list some of the plaintiffs because I've been talking about the sort of different interests that are concerned about privacy and surveillance. So some of the plaintiffs, Bill of Rights Defense Committee is a plaintiff. The named plaintiff is the First Unitarian Church of Los Angeles. The Cal Guns organization is also a plaintiff. Yeah. Greenpeace is a plaintiff. There's another guns advocacy group. I don't remember what their name is. But the point being that, I think oftentimes if we come from one or the other side of the political spectrum, we think we're the only people who care about these issues. But you have Unitarians and gun advocacy groups on the same lawsuit for a reason. And the main argument in this lawsuit, of course, we're talking about Fourth Amendment implications, but one of the main arguments is actually a First Amendment argument around the freedom to associate. So these are all groups that do advocacy, and we need to have the ability to communicate with our members. Our members need to have the ability to communicate with each other, and that ability is being chilled when we know that the government is collecting and listening to everything we do. And, I would say for an organization like Bill of Rights Defense Committee, and actually, you mentioned I'm the executive vice president for the National Lawyers Guild, we're organizations that work with people across the political spectrum, sometimes people that are not very popular. Mm-hmm. And we know that that can be dangerous now. So I think there's a very real chilling effect. It's not imagined. It's something that you really feel when you're doing this work, particularly if it's legal advocacy.
Yeah. As I understand it, what these this broad listing of groups behind this suit do have in common is that they're all Verizon customers.
All Verizon customers.
That's what gives them standing, because now we have this FISA court order specifically naming Verizon, because previous suits like this have been stopped cold. I remember like Chris Hedges and some other journalists tried to sue, and they were told you don't have standing because you don't know if they're spying on you and you can't prove it. So.
Yeah, one of the points that BORDC wants to make all the time is do not depend on the courts to protect your freedoms at this point. And that's even setting aside the fact that the technology is way beyond the understanding of most courts, and that the courts really lag behind technology. There's really also the issue that courts have become complacent, and standing, as you mentioned, is becoming more and more of an issue when there's secrecy involved. I mean, the Clapper decision in the Supreme Court made it almost impossible to challenge these programs. And, we got our lucky break, and we'll see. I'm really excited to see where the argument goes.
Yeah. I in fact, got a call at the Peace and Justice Center asking if we were on Verizon because of this lawsuit. And I said, no, we're not, but I'll switch our service so I can be. But I almost wish we were. I would love to be part of this, and I'm glad you're carrying that through. So we've seen some action in Congress on this. There was the late night attempt to defund the whole program. They fell 12 votes short, and it was pretty stunning, the Amash Conyers amendment.
So I think it's important to clarify that amendment was actually improperly characterized by the people who didn't want to see it pass. So they were saying that this amendment would defund the entire NSA. And the amendment was specifically worded so that it would defund mass surveillance without suspicion. And so it was really a positive amendment. There was no reason why it shouldn't have passed. And it's actually amazing. We actually had an article in our blog, we won by losing the vote. And the point is that, as you said, 12 votes short. That is the best action that we've seen in Congress for years on this issue. Listening to the conversation around it, seeing the bipartisan support, it was a really exciting moment. And we're still in an exciting moment now. That vote just happened. There are over a dozen bills in Congress right now addressing the NSA, and it's also the August recess.
Yeah,
So.
what should we be paying attention to and talking to our representatives during this August recess about?
So, of course, there's a range of bills. Some of them are stronger than others, and we've focused on 4 bills. One of them is the Repeal the Surveillance State Act, and that is, let me just make sure I have the, so that's Rush Holt. It's HR 2818. So this would entirely
2818?
Yeah, that's HR 2818. And this would entirely repeal the Patriot Act and the 2008 FISA Act amendments. This is a very aggressive act, obviously, and just based on the conversation around the Amash Conyers amendment, its chances of passing maybe not great, but the fact that it's being proposed and there should be a conversation around it are really exciting.
Yeah.
So that's a great bill. There's also a bill from Senator Leahy that is the FISA Accountability and Privacy Protection Act, and that's S1215. So this would fix a lot of those issues around mass surveillance. It would also address the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court. It would make stronger legal standards. And this has bipartisan support. It's a very extensive bill. It covers a lot of specific issues. And it actually has a good chance of passing. So, if you're going to contact your senators, I think we know how Senator Feinstein is going to vote on it. But it's certainly something to push for and push for support for that. There's also a bill from Conyers and Amash. This is the Liberty Act, and it's HR 2399. And this one would actually address those gag orders that we were talking about earlier, and again has some specific reforms for the legal standards that have allowed this kind of suspicionless surveillance. And then finally, the last act is the Fourth Amendment Restoration Act, and that's from Senator Rand Paul. And let me get the number of that for you. That is S1121. So this is a very simple bill. These other bills that I mentioned are more comprehensive. The Leahy bill and the Amash and Conyers bill are more comprehensive. This bill only covers phone surveillance, but it's very simple. It just requires a warrant when you're going to be listening to phone calls, when you're going to be collecting call information.
Yeah.
And its simplicity is
we
pretty
all
great.
thought the Fourth Amendment already said that. It does mention warrants in there and suspicion and stuff. But
He's actually been active on the third party issue as well.
Yeah.
So
good. All right. Well, that's a lot of information. We'll put it up on our website, peaceandjustice.org, and we'll certainly be putting out sign-on letters about this. Everybody's in the district now, so watch for that information at peaceandjustice.org, and we'll start generating some phone calls and heat on Congress. So let's go to the audience. I see a lot of people here. I bet there's a lot of questions or comments or solutions, so just hold up your hand and wait for the microphone to arrive. The mic is more for the people at home. So if you would stand up, make it easy for our camera people.
Okay.
And hold
Thank
that
you.
close.
Okay, I have 2 quick questions. One is a new question about new things going on. Second one's an old one. First one is the Peninsula Police Department's just announced that they're doing a license plate reader on the top of police cars. I wonder if you could also comment on that and if there's any action going on around that. And then number 2 is old. A lot of us in this audience remember with the FBI counterintelligence and ContelPro, feeling like, is this going to be coming back? Is there anybody tracking that once they have this metadata, are they going to do anything like they did? Because it's well documented what happened in the 60s and 70s. Thank you.
Thank you. You mentioned before while you're introducing your group that you work at the grassroots level because of the local nature of a lot of the surveillance national security state.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point that you bring up. There are a lot of things going on locally. So in Alameda County, we have the sheriff trying to purchase a drone. In Oakland, we have the Oakland City Council that's authorizing a domain awareness center, which is like a little mini database that I won't go into too much. We have joint terrorism task forces here. We have a fusion center here. There's a lot going on at the very local level. And I don't know people who are working on the license plate reader issue, but if there's one person that's concerned about something, and I'm sure there are more people concerned about it, this is exactly the kind of thing that we would love to help people organize around. There's a lot of resources around license plate readers and the issues that they present from the ACLU and Electronic Privacy Information Center, and also just the way that they tie into other forms of surveillance. So the Fusion Center, which I mentioned here in Northern California, it's the Northern California Regional Intelligence Center. So this is like a little mini NSA database, basically, that ties together all the local law enforcement with the FBI eGuardian database and all of that. So not to go too far down that rabbit hole, but the point being, this is absolutely something you can organize around. There are a lot of resources, and I would encourage you to find like-minded people. We do have some connections down here, so if you want introductions, we're always happy to make those. And I think it may be on the website, but in case it isn't, you can find us at constitutioncampaign.org. And you can also email us if you're interested in working on any of these issues at the local level at organizing@bordc.org. And for everybody in the audience tonight, I have cards and more information. So, and then
is that on the stuff that's out on the seats?
Our website is on the stuff that's out on the seats, and I have cards up here, which I'll be happy to hand out to folks afterwards.
And whatever else doesn't make it onto the seats, for those of you watching at home, we will put this on the web page. Where this video will be in a few days. We'll put these various resources on there.
So just briefly responding to your second point, I think it's really important, particularly for people who don't necessarily remember COINTELPRO, to be aware of the history. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act was passed because of the Church Committee hearings. The Church Committee hearings happened because people were targeted completely illegally by the FBI. They were targeted in a way, informants were used. I'm probably saying things that most people listening know, but in case you don't, the FBI planted informants in political movements and turned those political movements against each other, created suspicion, targeted Martin Luther King Jr., the kind of things that they were doing a couple of years later sounded imaginary, and that's the problem. Like, we do really have a short memory. People forget McCarthy, they forget COINTELPRO, and then they forget, everything. So I think it is really important to keep things in the historical context and not stop talking about those things. And I think that's part of what happened. People did stop talking about COINTELPRO. I actually only learned about it in the last 4 or 5 years, and I'm somebody whose parents were affected by FBI surveillance. So, it's something that we need to be educating people about, particularly younger people and younger activists.
All right. Where are we in the audience? Right here up front. Wait for the mic. Get the mic.
I recently received a letter from Anna Eshoo, our congressional representation, in response to my having sent her a message thanking her for, I forget, but it was something about the whole intelligence thing.
Homage
Yes,
she voted yes on it.
amendment.
Yes.
I'll just
Exactly.
take a moment to mention all 4 of the representatives in kind of our membership area, Jackie Spear, Anna Eshoo, Mike Honda, and Zoe Lofgren, all voted yes to end the NSA data metadata program. And I'm glad you thought to call her and say thank you, because it's an important thing to do, to say thanks once in a while.
Right. And that was reinforced by the fact that I didn't just get an email, I got an actual physical letter that was definitely saying, thanks for, they really want to know that
Absolutely.
if they do what we want them to do, that we notice. Mm-hmm. So I guess my question is, since Eshoo is on the Foreign Intelligence Committee and has been for years, and she knows a lot of stuff, and she was saying that, how can we get behind her so she knows we're behind her to help her continue to push ahead on this and possibly even take more leadership on it?
Well, go ahead.
So I'm so glad actually that you mentioned writing to your representative. So Of course, you are lucky here that you have good representation. I think there are probably some listeners to the program who are in San Francisco, and Nancy Pelosi has been one of the worst forces, that has really been supporting the NSA. So I think a good start really is writing a letter. I think, and can I ask, did you send an email or did you write a letter?
I sent an email.
Sent an email. And you got a physical letter back.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. So writing a letter, making a phone call. Right now, as I mentioned, of course, it's the August recess, so there's going to be fundraisers, and there are less and less town halls these days because people don't want to be confronted. But it's certainly worth, if she is having, and I think she had a town hall here recently, but if she's having more town halls, going and letting her know that she's supported. I think all of those are really good ways to show support. And I just want to give a pitch for the sort of 4 strategies that we recommend during the August recess. So one is trying to get meetings with your representatives. So I would actually encourage you, as a follow-up to the letter, even preferably with a group behind you. So if you're active with any specific groups, trying to get a meeting with her. If you can't get a meeting with her, meetings with aides are also useful. But to have a conversation about this, to talk about these bills, to talk about what she's going to support, what she can support, leadership, that sort of thing. So we recommend trying to get a meeting, writing op-eds. So you could also write an op-ed about these issues and sort of, say thank you to the people who voted well and heap shame on those who didn't, Nancy Pelosi. And then the third recommendation is what I was just talking about, attending town halls and events. And then the fourth, which isn't applicable in your case, but in my case it certainly is what we like to call bird dogging. And that is attending every single event that you can find out about for your representative when they've ignored your questions and they've ignored you. You show up and you ask the questions anyway, and you're loud. The level of confrontation can be up to you. The Fourth Amendment, the 1984 rally in San Francisco, they actually made two big signs to leave at Nancy Pelosi's office. But depending on the stance of your representative, any of those tactics in combination can be useful. But I would really recommend trying to get a meeting with her and seeing where she stands on the legislation. And they see so much that really giving them the citizen's perspective is useful. It really is a useful thing.
Locally in the 18th district with Anna Eshoo, she does have town hall meetings, but they're telephone town halls. And she said they actually average about 4,000 to 5,000 people on these calls.
Wow.
And the way it works is they do it town by town. So your phone will just ring one night and there'll be kind of a recording coming on saying there's a town hall meeting coming on. And then if you want to listen, you just press 1 or something, and then you can ask questions. And it's really good. And leading up to, the Peace and Justice Center just did this town hall with Anna Eshoo on the fact of corporate personhood and a constitutional amendment on that. One of the reasons she did that, I think, is that we were listening. I've been listening in on these telephone town halls. In every one of those calls, at least 2 or 3 of the questions were on that issue of corporate power. So she hears from it. So, and if you've never gotten one of those calls, call her office here and say, I want to get on the telephone town hall list because I don't want to miss these. I don't know how they pick the numbers, but
I would strongly recommend doing that because it might be that they're doing landlines.
Landlines only, yeah, for what they can find.
Yeah.
Well, the NSA's got all our phone numbers. She could just ask them. Do we have more questions in the audience here? Way in the back. And if you could stand up there, please.
Hi, I think it started last night, and then I heard it again on Democracy Now!, that they're using the NSA information in crime, and then they're sort of fabricating the trail afterwards.
I have not read those reports yet, but I wouldn't be surprised. One of the big questions that we always have with all of this information gathering is, what are they doing with it? If there's so much of it, what are they doing with it? And why is it that when there are actual crimes that are going to be committed that might kill a lot of people, that they oftentimes can't seem to stop those, but that they can focus on surveilling innocent people. So I haven't heard that, but I do know that just going back to the local level with the Fusion Center, the Northern California Regional Intelligence Center, the information that goes into the Fusion Center, which is completely not based on even reasonable suspicion, which I think we could talk about that for a long time, but that information does go to a number of different databases. So as I mentioned, it goes to the FBI eGuardian database, and it's linked into gang databases, So I think the connections, I'm completely unsurprised to hear that, because one of the things that happened right after 9/11 was a reorganization of intelligence, and we have now the Director of National Intelligence, and we have the information sharing environment. It gets more Orwellian the more you talk about it. But there's this thing called the information sharing environment where all of these different levels of databases basically meet, and all the information is combined and filtered and categorized. I don't know how the NSA information figures into that, but considering that, going back to the X key score and the ability they have to filter out all of these specific parameters, I don't see why they wouldn't be able to do that and then compare it to other information.
Yeah, I heard that report on Democracy Now!, which does air on this station, by the way, at 5 p.m. every evening, Channel 27 here in the Mid-Peninsula, because Peace and Justice Center sponsors the showing of Democracy Now! On this TV station. Quickly, it was a Reuters report investigation that found out some of this NSA data is making its way to local, like, drug enforcement people and stuff. And when they develop a case and they go to the prosecutors, they say, well, the case originated with a tip, because they're not telling them it came from NSA data mining, because that would be illegal and the prosecutors couldn't go to court with it, and goodbye case. So that it's illegally obtained information that turns into lying to prosecutors. Hey, these people are supposed to be on the same side, defending us against the criminals. And anyway, it's an interesting story, and of course on the Democracy Now! Website you can see a lot of the past shows and transcripts. So this is part of that story, so check out that resource as well. We've got about 10 minutes left. What else do we have here in the audience? Crystal, why don't you go there and then come back to this side of the audience?
Hi, my question is based upon the fact that we live in a corporate surveillance state, and setting the government aside for a second, Facebook, Google, and all these shadow organizations, their economic engine is our privacy. And so they have an economic interest in obliterating privacy norms, and the extent to which our data is already trafficked, aside from any government intervention, is terrifying to me. And so if we don't address that piece, all our work with, the courts and representatives is for naught. And so I'd like to hear your comments on that. But I'd also like to say that we are participating by, when I click on a website that has nothing to do with Facebook or Twitter or anything, and then I look on my computer and I see 64 cookies, even though I put my computer settings to not accept cookies. So those are automatically showing up. So organizations like Peninsula Peace and Justice or whatever, well-meaning, important organizations whose work I support, we're being co-opted by the Googles and the Facebooks and the Twitters. And is there a way that we can remove ourselves from that domain and not continue supporting it as part of this effort?
So a couple of responses. One, I would say that there's definitely, for those who are technically inclined, there are a lot of resources on how you can protect yourself. How well they work, is going to depend on the government agency and what the purpose of the surveillance is, and all of that, and all the technical information that I don't really know. And some of these methods, like the Tor project, I don't know if people are familiar with that, but it's a service that helps anonymize internet browsing and actually routes traffic through other people's computers. And even that has been compromised at times. So, but that being said, there's encryption, there's lots of different ways that you can protect yourself online. As far as the companies, you're absolutely right. And actually I am pretty paranoid. My Facebook it has a really old email address. It doesn't have my actual birthday. And actually my quote on Facebook is, regarding privacy, we decided that would be the new norm and we went for it. And that's a quote from Mark Zuckerberg. Of Facebook fame. So, I think you're certainly right. And I think that we need to make a realistic assessment of how we're using these technologies. Do I still make events on Facebook for, protests or workshops or whatever? Yes, I do. I've made a calculated decision and decided that I'm going to use it and how I'm going to use it. So I think it's really up to every individual how they're going to use it. And unfortunately, I think the reality is the march of technology forward, once it's gotten to a certain point, and where we are right now is a very ugly point, it is really hard to turn back. I think that's a huge question. I think it goes way beyond just the legal issues. I think it goes to corporate personhood. It goes to consumer capitalism. It's a huge question, and I think you should devote an entire hour program to it.
Yeah, it is a good question. One of the things I learned at this at screening Saturday night about this terms and conditions may apply, there's a growing movement to institute do not track. And I think this is going to be something, we'll keep an eye on it. There is a website, trackoff.us, Track Off Us, where they're starting a petition to push forward actually do not track legislation, where the default position would be do not track, not that you can opt out, that you would have to opt in. It's going to be a tough struggle because, as our audience member said, they're making huge, it's their business model, is our data. That's how they're making their money. So it's not going to be an easy struggle, but that's never kept us from engaging in these struggles before. Right.
Sorry, just one other really quick point is that I would encourage everybody to not feel paralyzed by the knowledge of the surveillance that's happening, because then that means that it has been effective.
Excellent
we need to know what's happening, educate yourself, but do not feel paralyzed. Don't stop showing up at protests. Don't stop writing letters. Don't stop doing any of this, because then they've won.
Thank you. Good point. Okay, right here.
Hello, I am paranoid and have been since the age of 5, etc. I even keep a file called Paranoia. It's taken up a whole drawer. This is a small thing. I'm on the phone because I have a landline. I don't have an iPhone. I have a SIM card and one that travels around. I paid $1.50 for it. It works very well. Doesn't entertain me, etc. I complain oftentimes to my family because they will listen to me at length. And I get a lot of emails about save the polar bears, save the grizzly bears, save the gray fox. Give your money, save these. These guys are all predators. And I'm thinking, open space, who's going to patrol the open space? I mean, I'm really off the map. And I'm complaining and complaining and complaining. And every day I get emails about this issue. And all of a sudden, they stop. Okay? That's my story. Anybody else got anything like this going? Where you get a delusion?
We're not starting a conversation among the audience.
Okay.
So thank you for the comment.
Okay.
If you'll return the microphone, we have one more desperate question over here, and that might be all the time we're going to have.
This may be, I don't know, maybe it's totally
That's
totally frivolous, but I've been around for quite a while. When I was a kid back in the late 50s, we had a sign on our front door that said, "Peace is our only security." And at intervals when my brother and I, who were 10 and 12, were at home, the FBI would come and knock on the door and say, and we were told to lean out the window and say, "We're not allowed to open the door if there are no adults at home." Everybody knew they were around, and many years later in the 60s at meetings, we used to joke that the people who came to spy on us had these heavy, clunky shoes. And we would get up in front of our meetings and say, "Hello, Roger. We're glad to see you here. Somebody get Roger a cup of coffee." And I'm not saying we shouldn't do everything we should to combat all of the surveillance, but in one form or another, it's always gone on. And I think I just want to second that. Don't be afraid of it. Just keep going and be as smart as you can about evading them and joke them when you find them.
Sage advice indeed. It's true, though. The broad outline of this story is nothing new in this country. The certain police agencies have been trying to uncover information that people don't want uncovered or don't even know is being uncovered. But the technology, as we're seeing with these Snowden revelations, is just taking it to levels that almost seem hard to conceive of.
Unless you have seen or read 1984.
Right.
I mean, I think that was a great theme for the rallies that happened around the country on Sunday, because there are so many things in that book that are happening now. You know, it's not science fiction anymore. But that being said, I absolutely agree. You know, we have to know, we have to educate ourselves, we have to fight against it. But we have to not lose the plot, right?
Yeah.
The plot is social justice and moving towards a more fair and just society and not allowing ourselves to be paralyzed by this.
Several years ago, I gave a series of talks that were titled "Orwell Was an Optimist." But one of my points was actually the last chapter of 1984 is written from a future perspective. We don't know who writes it because the actual narrative of 1984 ends in a very depressing way. But there's a last chapter that looks back and talks about this period, and it doesn't exist anymore. And so Orwell might have been an optimist. He looks back at Newthink and this whole period as in the past, as history. Go reread 1984. So in a lot of ways, Orwell was an optimist. He didn't say how that chapter got written. I always think of it, that's the chapter that we're all trying to write right now. So Nadia Kayali has been our guest, legal fellow with the Bill of Rights Defense Committee and Executive Vice President for the National Lawyers Guild. The website hopefully is on your screen, but it's bordc.org. Thank you very much for joining us here.
Thank you.
It's been a real education. You've been watching Other Voices, brought to you by Peninsula Peace and Justice Center. We're here live on the first Tuesday of every month. The video will be online at peaceandjustice.org within a couple of days, and you can see about 8 rebroadcasts here on Channel 7 throughout the rest of the month. Thanks for coming. We'll see you all next month. Thank you again. It went awfully fast.
Yeah, it's really good.